Hi, everyone. I'm so happy you're here. I'm Laura Barr, the founder and owner of Emerging Educational Consulting, and we are so glad you are here today. At Emerging, we provide one-to-one mentorship for students from the beginning to the end of the college application process. And we actually serve parents and students from the beginning to end of that process. One of the things that I always say is I wake up every day to grow good humans. And what better way to grow good humans to provide them with education so that they can impact and transform? And today we're in for a real treat. Talk about education and educating, especially we're focused on girls today. But I am delighted to introduce a friend and a writer, Hilary Afshary. Hilary's going to be joining us today to talk about her amazing new book, Dorm to Doorstep. Hilary, I really want you to take a minute to introduce yourself. And then after you do that, do you mind just diving into why did you write this book? Why
Sure,
Dorm
sure.
to Doorstep?
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for having me today. I'm Hilary Afshary. I'm a mom, just like many of you. I have a background in corporate community relations, communications, marketing, and a lot of those learnings are in the book. But I live in Denver. I have one daughter, Eva, who goes to Loyola Marymount University out in Los Angeles. And so much of what I've learned as a mom, is woven throughout the pages. But just, stepping back, why did I write this book? Well, when Eva was in high school and even in middle school a little bit, I kind of observed this juxtaposition of young women needing advice crossed with them wanting their independence as they forged their path to begin life away from home. And what I observed is that they did not want to get the advice from the person who wanted to give it, i.e., mom. That always results in the eye roll. And so I said, you know what? I'm going to sit down and write this book to become these young women, and I'm actually hearing from a lot of moms that they want their sons to read it, but
Definitely.
to become this young women's personal cheerleader, to really take them from what now to I got this. And so that was really the premise of the book. And I also wrote it in a way that I hope would appeal to this generation's young people. Short tales, tips, and tidbits, nothing that goes longer than 2 pages, in a bright, visually appealing manner that would pull them in, something they could pick up and put down at their leisure and learn something every time.
It's such a
So yeah,
conundrum. I love how you said that. It's such a conundrum, this idea of like the things, the time in the life, the time in these children's lives, these students' lives, kids' lives, that is the most important for them to have get all of this access to wisdom is the time that they don't want it from their parents.
right.
And I think we've lost that kind of mentorship and that connection with that aunties and grandmas who are actually
Yes,
giving some of that wisdom. And I also think our society has changed so much that the advice needed isn't
yes,
things we were prepared to even give. And I think for me,
right.
that is something that is really, really special about this book. I think the way that it comes to us in these little snippets is amazing. But I also think the way that you organized it, um, and how you impart that knowledge is really important. Can you talk about that a little bit? So, how's it organized?
Absolutely.
Tell us about that.
Yeah. Well, I actually organized it like a favorite ice cream sundae, because, who doesn't like ice cream? And I start out with the ice cream, which is really the glow up girl section. And that's really about elevating young women from the inside. So providing advice about combating anxiety, about inspiring them to be the very best that they can be, um, to how they treat others, to gratitude, practicing gratitude. And, also like that their journey is not the same as somebody else's. We all have a different path that we will all discover. and kind of one of the things that I like to say is live life and love life your way. And that's kind of what that whole section is about, to try to help them develop that. And then we kind of go into the sauce. So whatever your favorite sauce is, and that's the glam bam thank you ma'am section. And that's really about wellness, beauty, and fashion. And I start with wellness because, you know, in order to really look good and feel good, we have to take care of our bodies and our souls. And, oftentimes young women are not always thinking about that, but that is something that as they transition throughout their lifetime becomes more and more important. And it's so important to think about that from a young age. Skincare, for example, and I don't mean like all the lotions and potions. I mean, sunscreen, like protect your outer layer so that you can protect your inner layer. So, all the things around wellness. And then we move into kind of some makeup tips and fashion tips and shopping mantras and how to thrift. And then we go towards the sprinkles. And this is really about, it's called Laced with Grace, and it's really about relationships and demeanor. And for me, this is where the golden rule of golden rules applies, that life is about people, the connections that you make, whether personally or professionally, or, with your family. It's all about how people come in and go out of your life, and how you create these authentic, meaningful relationships that will not only give you an outlet in which to share your love, your talents, your compassion, but it also that you will receive the same in kind. So we delve into a lot of personal stories and advice and things that I learned in the workplace that apply to relationships. And then finally, we move into this section called Gather Round with Goodness. This is kind of the day-to-day stuff, the adulting 101, adulting 2.0, things that, we use on a daily basis. We touch on finance and savings and decorating and entertaining and share some recipes. And then when we get to the very end, kind of the gather around with goodness is kind of the cherry on top. But then we have something that I call the place of truth. And Laura may want to talk a little bit more about this, because I know that she really feels like this is an important component. And the place of truth are the red pages that are like life and death. This is the serious stuff that no one wants to talk about, but that we absolutely must talk about. Things like sexual assault, drugs, drinking, the really hard things. And in many of those instances throughout the book, I share kind of these either personal stories of my own or personal stories that I've observed throughout my life.
Yeah, I think this is I get chills just thinking about this, because I think you did what you did that was so brilliant and so important, is something that we actually try to do in our practice, and I think we're pretty bold about it. Like, we really are intentional about weaving things in around, do you know what Title IX is? Do you know what consent is? Do you know? But we're in these like one-to-one relationships, we're mostly all over Zoom, and we're trying to snippet this in. But the idea that
Mhm.
there is a book that has these kinds of tips that are the life and death kind of tips, I think are really important. And I think the way that you did it is the way I wish for all parents and all adults to do it, is to weave it in with kind of the joyful stuff, not to threaten, not to scare,
Right.
not to intimidate, because this is really serious stuff, and it's scary. And I also think
Hmm.
a lot of parents might not even know some of this stuff
Right.
is going on. It's that
Right.
whole thing, you don't know what you don't know. And I think what is so, so lovely and heart wrenching, and I love this. Like, let me show an example to people what we mean by red pages, right? Like, you're going through all these lovely kind of pages, and then all of a sudden it's like, quick pause. right? Never
Yes.
leave your drink unattended. Never. Right?
Never.
And some you give explanation for, some you don't, but most students will know why that's the case. And if they don't, they'll look it up or, do whatever. But I think that this, what can you tell me about, did you ever consider not putting these in? Were you ever
No.
thinking like, so tell me how that, your thought process.
Well, I mean, one of the stories that's in there has had a profound impact on my daughter Eva. Long story short, I studied abroad for a year and I was doing my laundry, and there was not a laundry in the apartment where I was staying. And so I was going back and forth to the laundromat, and I came to the building where I was, and this surly little man kind of followed me. I didn't really realize he was following me. I thought he lived there. I did get this feeling like, oh, I don't know about this. And I thought, oh, Hillary, you're being silly. And so we both walk into the building. We get into the elevator, and he pushes like floor 5, and I pushed 17 because that was where I was staying. And the doors closed, and he immediately attacked me. Unbuckled his trousers, pulled at my dress. I was fighting, and thankfully he did push number 5, and the elevator stopped, and I ran out screaming. But, you know, those things are so important. And to my daughter, that story has stayed with her, that I mean, I really think that in life, it is the stories that we hear about that we remember, and yes, there are a couple of pages, never leave your drink unattended. And I could give a story about that. But when you hear a circumstance where it happened to somebody, it really resonates the danger. And no, I didn't put them in there to scare you. Although, quite honestly, when it comes to drugs and fentanyl, I hope you are scared, because people lose their lives. There's another story about a young man that I knew that lost his life. And, that impacted not only his life, his whole family's life. It is devastating and heartbreaking. And you should be scared. You should be scared enough that you don't use drugs. And if you do, you best know where they come from. So there was never a moment that I thought about not including those, because they are so very important to hear.
Yeah. And again, I just celebrate so much the way that you went about it. And I mean, I guess I'll move out of this like scary,
Yes.
we want
The
our
rest of the
kids to
book is
know
not
as they're
scary.
running out the door to college. We're like, and don't forget all these things, but don't forget not to die. Like, don't forget not to get hurt. Don't forget to like be careful. And I still remember sometimes Monday mornings after a weekend when I knew my sons were, in fraternities. And I remember waking up Monday mornings just so glad I didn't get a phone call. Right.
Right.
And I think that brings me to this conversation. And I asked you this and you gave me an answer right away. I was like, when's your one coming out for boys? And you said, I don't do boys. And so
No.
really, I thought about it for a second. I've worked with, for so many years, I've worked with so many different kinds of students, and especially students who have diagnoses of ADHD or on the
Right.
spectrum. And these kinds of tips, kind of like, what would you do kind of tips, are extremely helpful for those kinds
Yes.
of students too, who just need this kind of explicit, like, here's what you do and here's what you don't do. And I think that's another reason why I really appreciated it. And then I decided maybe this book is for boys too, because
Yeah.
if boys, number one, they can learn about what some girls are thinking about. Also,
Right.
obviously, we work with a lot of LGBTQ community, so there's all the
Yes.
crossover depending on who's reading what. But then there's also like financial, and quite frankly, I have been using your tips. I used them all weekend when I packed my picnic charcuterie. And
Yeah.
I actually was very excited that it turns out that I've been very fashionable my whole life with wearing how do you say it?
Monochromatic. Yes.
Monochromatic outfits with one color pop. We used to call that the poor girl outfit. when I was in
Well,
college.
I call it smart, but yes, I
We
mean, yeah,
were like, you just wear black and then your red purse, or black and your yellow bag, or black and your like blue shoes.
yes,
That was pretty much
exactly.
like all we had back then in those days of college. But let's get to this. Since you have gone published the book and you've been out in the
Yes,
world, what are the
yes.
tips that are people are talking to you the most about? Like, what are the
I
things people are saying, and especially the girls?
Yes. Okay. Well, I will say just, hitting on the boy part and, all of the LGBTQ information, really honestly, yes, the book is presented in lots of pinks and whatever, but most of the information, probably 85 to 90% of the information it's not gender specific. It's just good common sense, which, sometimes we forget about. But, I touched on it before, but I think one of the, somebody just sent me a note last night, and I don't know if her coming to my book launch at all influenced this, but she was so excited because her daughter has gotten an internship, and she's like, and it was Brian, her husband, setting up the young lady with someone he knew. And then she kind of took that and ran with it. But, I would say that, the whole relationship portion is really resonating with people because so much of our lives are about relationships. And I've said this before that I have never gotten a job on my own without some connection, someone giving me an email, someone introducing me, whatever. So I would say that, that is really resonating. I think the way that the book is presented is resonating a lot because of the bright color and the fun and just the ability to open and close it and come back to it because of these kids and the way that they're receiving their information now. That, I mean, obviously the recipes, there are a few recipes in here that kind of can serve as sorority suppers or fraternity dinners or just, your family dinner with your friends on Sunday nights, things like that. I think like the laundry tips, one lady was like, my daughters are older, they're, in their own lives, but the laundry tips were something that I immediately sent to them because, some of the stuff like adding baking soda to your laundry to kind of keep it fresh, and then, white vinegar that works wonders on towels, white towels, keeping them fresh, and no fabric softener. But, I think the way that I really see the book is that there's a lot of stuff in here, and each person is different, right? Certain pieces of information are going to resonate with some people, and other pieces are going to resonate with different people. And that's really how I've learned in life is that, it's been at a certain thing will be said to me and I'll go, oh, light bulb, that totally makes sense to me. And then I run with that and go create something. So I think there's something for everybody, and everybody is going to enjoy maybe a different section. Like you brought up the white button down shirt, and it's
Yes.
kind of a closet staple. I think different people really are going to find that they love, different parts of the book depending on who you are, really. But I do think for, women and men going off to college, young people, there are some parts in here that I hope will really help them. Things I talked about rush, which can be, daunting and overwhelming for some young people. The grocery shopping, I have a checklist, and I know that you have one too that is very
Oh
similar.
yeah,
It's
I
kind of an
love your
accompaniment to the
checklist.
book.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it's so
just
good. I
things
want
like,
Sarah to add it. If you, Sarah, if you can add it, add it for anybody. I do see we have some people on today, so let's add that checklist. I absolutely loved it. We have a checklist too, but yours is very festive, and there's some tips in there that are just really valuable. So I really want people to have that, and we'll make sure it's on in our
okay.
community also. So we'll post that later today.
Yeah, well, I mean, and really, I'll be kind of on social media talking about some of those things, but, really starting to have those life skills, and you always talk about this, Laura, the successful launch, but building those life skills before you leave for college, during the summer before you leave for college, so that it isn't so overwhelming when you get there. And some of those are in the book. So mom and dad don't have to give you the tips. And that checklist is for you to print out and to give to your young person so that they have the checklist to go through so they can get themselves ready to launch.
Yeah, I love that. I love thinking about it. Like if like the parents could have their own version and the kids could have their own version because they're also preparing for that huge sense of loss. This, I didn't tell you,
Yes.
this just came up for me, but since you're so recent, I have 4 kids. They are all launched, and it's been a while since I
Right.
had one that left for college. And I know Eva's it wasn't too long ago you dropped her off.
Right.
It's May.
Mm-hmm.
Everyone's about to, this graduation class. What are some things that, whether they're in the book or just kind of words of wisdom to my families who will listen, that you would want to remind them of this time of year?
Well, I mean, as I'm talking to friends who have, a high school senior who's getting ready to graduate, I think there's this feeling among parents of, oh my gosh, I've got to hold on. I've got it. They're going to be leaving me in 2 to 3 months. I've got to hold on. I've got to hold on. And they're watching their child kind of actually pull away a little bit, and it can be hurtful. It can feel like, oh my gosh, I want to hold on more because they're pulling away. And I just had this conversation a few days ago, and I was like, but that they're doing exactly what they need to do. And our job is to let them, no matter how hard it is, because they are preparing themselves so that they can be successful. They've probably been doing it through senior year, but they may start doing it a lot more this summer. And we have to support them in that, because they're going to be going to, a brand new environment, and they need to be able to stand on their own without mom. And it can be heartbreaking, right? Like there's nothing more. And I wrote a letter that was published in Grown and Flown. And if people are not following that, that's a great kind of Facebook resource group. And they also write a blog. And it was about, when these young people come home and how anxious we are, and they're so exhausted. They just want to crawl into their beds and sleep, and they don't want to be inundated with a million questions, but we're dying to do it. But we have to just hold back a little and understand, that this is what we have worked their entire life to do, which is to, watch them grow and watch them fly. So I think as parents, that is the hardest thing to do, but that is probably the most necessary thing that we must do, because that's what they need from us.
I talk to parents all the time, all week long, about this idea that their parents say, my kids don't really listen to me. They don't pay attention, and I'm not going to be able to help them navigate this college application process. And I say, that means you're doing the best job, that they feel safe, that they can begin
Yes.
that process of letting go. That process
Yes.
of, I am my own. We say goodbye nagging, hello independence, right?
Yes.
Once they have
Yes.
that sense of independence, then you're doing your job. And psychologically, they're wired to do that.
Yes.
And that means that's what's
Right.
supposed to be happening. But the gap, and I talked about this at the beginning, the gap really is that there's no one who's been filling the gap as far as creating a village for students of that kind of extended family. And I think these kinds of books and these kind of conversations are bringing that ability for students to have, like, it feels better to let them go if you know they're going with this in
Yes.
their hand, right?
Yes.
You have
Yes.
people, those guardrails. When I was an early childhood educator, we used to call it about guardrails. Like, let them go to the playground and let them go swing on the swing. And if they go a little too high and fall off, you're going to be there, but you're not going to catch them, right? Like, it's
Right.
okay.
Yes.
Just kind of
Yes.
be here. And as they go to college, you're not even doing that, right? You're
Right.
really just letting them go. So I just love that. What else did I want to ask you? Oh, I want to know what your favorite tips are. Like, will you read us a few? I was
Oh
lucky
my
enough to be at
gosh.
your
What are my
opening.
favorite?
I was lucky enough to be at your opening, and you did that lovely speech, and you had some dog ears, I noticed. I don't know if you have that book with you.
I do have some dog ears. I mean, there's so many pages, and I've already kind of talked about the relationships, and I think for the kids, I had a story. I don't know if you can see this, but it's the page about your relationships are like your favorite stuffy, and you nurture them and you care for them. But also, if for some reason the little stuffy or the relationship gets germy or toxic,
Mhm.
that you also know when to replace that, but to always replace it because they're so very important. Practicing gratitude daily. I actually created a podcast. It's called Your Daily 3 Meditation, and it's a 3-minute meditation Monday through Fridays to give gratitude and set an intention. And I actually created it for kind of young people because 3 minutes is sometimes all we have, but I couldn't find anything like it, so I created it. There are 50 or 60 episodes up on Apple, iTunes, and Spotify, etc. But practicing gratitude daily, and then some of the fun things. I'm such a bargain shopper, so I've got like a whole section on thrifting and consignment, and this funny story about this shirt that I bought, and and some fun rhymes and stuff like that. I love the part about finding your personal unicorn. So the things that bring you passion, because when you find your passions, work isn't work. It's actually fun and just rewarding, and you lose your mind in the work and you're not watching the clock. So doing that exercise to kind of discover your personal unicorns, and that's something you're going to do for the rest of your life because things change. And that's the one thing we can count on. And you may be finding a different unicorn in your 20s, 30s, 40s, and 50s. I mean, I started as an economist and now I'm an author. So, and I did a lot of things in between. So I had a lot of personal unicorns. So those are some of my favorite parts. But I mean, there's so many. All black. I wear black all the time. It's just chic because it just kind of is to me. Yeah, I mean, food shopping on a budget or the entertainment guides or, not spending a fortune on expensive makeup products. Like I've used Oil of Olay SPF since I was 15 years old and it works. And, things like that. There's all kinds of things, but then there's a lot of really meaty stuff, about really like you are enough just the way that you are. Like focusing on the 90% you got right versus always going to the 10% that you might want to improve upon. And really the goal is to build young people up because, the more we support them and build them up, the more successful they'll be. Really.
I think, and as we finish up our time together, you started saying this, but this book is about the beginning, really addresses who you are on the inside. And when you
Yes.
know who you are on your inside, we often start with our values and our personas and our why. In our practice, we're talking like it's the first thing we do with them. And even if they're only 15 or 16 years old and they're like, yeah, here's my values, here's my personas, and we practice it year after year.
Yes.
And it's like this becomes part of their identity. And that sense of self and that sense of um, clarity and identity, I think,
Yes.
is the gift that we as parents, when we allow them for that space, that when they
Yes.
go to college, it's not just about getting in, it's about what we say, it's about not just, it's where you go, what you'll do when you get there, and who you'll be when you get there.
Yes.
And then this is definitely like the sprinkle on top for all the different ways you get to practice being
Yes.
you, the you that you
You.
are. So
Developing the you that you want to be, and there's a lot in here about values and just because that's what makes you you.
yeah. Well, what's next? We have one, oh my gosh, it's
What's
exactly
next?
1:30, and I always promise my families we're going to be done.
I know.
You have 1 second to tell us what's your next
Well, I
endeavor.
would love to speak. I would love to be out speaking to young people and parents about all the stuff in here. I'm creating a workbook, and then maybe another book. We'll see.
Okay, well, I'll be your biggest fan. And
Thank you.
for those of you who are just listening, you will find on our podcast, we'll be entering the PDFs and all of the different access to Hilary's podcasts and all of that. Keep up the great work. And I can't wait I'm reading it every night, a little tip.
Thank you so
So
much.
I'm loving it and sharing it with my families. So thank you so much
Thank
for
you.
being with us today.
Okay, thanks so much, Laura. And you can get it on Amazon, just so
That's
that
great. And we
people
did
know.
put that in
Yeah,
here to our listeners. Okay, great.
great.
All right. Talk to
Okay,
you later.
thank you, everybody. Thanks,
Okay,
Laura.
bye.
Bye.